soit tous les deux. Hein. C'est bien compliqué. Ça y est, je peux commencer. Alors, donc, j'ai présenté Bruno Frey, professeur à l'Université de Zurich. J'allais dire que tout le monde connaît, la profession connaît très bien, peut-être pas dans le public. Spécialiste finalement en microéconomie de beaucoup de thèmes très différents, très éclectiques, parfois iconoclastes. Et ce soir, en revanche, il va nous parler de choses particulièrement sérieuses, parce que c'est quand même un grand spécialiste de la théorie des choix publics, qui est un nom barbare, je n'ai jamais très bien compris, les faux CJ, FOCJ, mais il va nous expliquer ce que ça signifie. Et on entre donc dans la partie du séminaire où on discute de l'État d'une façon beaucoup plus approfondie, et là plus particulièrement à travers le fédéralisme vu, j'allais dire, par Bruno Frey, spécialiste non seulement de la théorie des choix publics, mais suisse-allemand. Je ne sais pas si c'est bien ça, mais connaissant bien justement certaines formes de fédéralisme. Bruno, je te passe la parole.
Merci bien, je suis très content d'être ici et de parler dans le cadre de cette université et de l'Institut, mais malheureusement mon français n'est pas assez bien pour être capable de donner un discours. Et pour cela, je vais parler en anglais, qui n'est pas ma langue paternelle. So I try to speak English. So my question is it possible to have a government which has not monopoly power? And of course everybody thinks it's the essence of government to have a monopoly. And my answer is very clear. It's not true. It's not true that it must be the case that there is an identity between government and a monopoly. It's possible to have government without monopoly, and I make this suggestion which Bernard has already mentioned. I call it Foci. So that's the way I pronounce it. I would like to propose 5 ideas which are central to what I like to present. The first idea is that the existing monopoly states are rather inefficient compared to what we can observe with different arrangements which have less monopoly power. This inefficiency comes from various economic and also political reasons. Then my second idea, which I would like to develop, is that the reaction to this inefficiency which we observe is very often to have larger units. So if municipal government doesn't work well, the solution is normally to extend the size of this municipality. Or if a nation doesn't work well, one takes the step to have a supranation such as the European Union. And I think that is exactly a wrong reaction to the problems of the territorial monopoly state. So I propose a completely different solution which does away with some of the problems. It's called key, functional, overlapping, competing jurisdictions. And I, of course, will explain what I mean by it. And my claim is that those keys, these new jurisdictions which give up monopoly power, which do not have monopoly power, increase, strengthen democracy, raise economic efficiency, and are able to dynamically adjust to the problems we have. And I think this possibility to look to have a dynamic adjustment is really very, very essential, and it means that one has a process view instead of an outcome view, and that is of course not what normal economics does, but I think it's a very important step. So the dynamic adjustment means that these new government units, these jurisdictions, adjust to the problems at hand and not the other way around, that the problems try to be solved within the given boundaries of nations. And so the conclusion is that we should not only have the four freedoms, namely the free mobility of labor and capital and of goods and services, but we should have a fifth freedom, which is it should be possible to establish such jurisdictions which meet these requirements. Now I would like to proceed by advancing propositions, and overall I would like to propose 10 propositions, and the first proposition is of course one which is a very classical one, and I think fully accepted within the economic theory of federalism, namely that federalism has a lot of advantages over a unified, unitary state for these three reasons. First of all, if you have a decentralized government, it can provide much better to the different preferences, or rather demands, of the population, because it's better informed, it's closer to the problems. The second reason is that when there are many units, so when we have a decentralized state, we can have political competition through exit of the firms and of individuals, and that's of course essentially the Tibu idea. And then a third reason is that when you have decentralization, the units can try their own ideas, and if they are successful, they will be imitated. When they are not successful, they will be discarded. So it introduces not only competition, but also, or through competition, it establishes innovation. And I think innovation is a very, very important part of what we need. Of course, federalism has problems, as any other institutional setup. It does have problems, but what we need is not to compare to an ideal, but to compare to actually existing institutional setups. And if we do that, I do think that the disadvantages of federalism are minor and can be overcome. So my conclusion is that, or my first proposition is, federalism is an efficient institution compared to a unitary state. My second proposition is that federalism really exists in almost all nations in the world, and France is a little bit of an exception here. If you look at the big nations like Brazil, India, Argentina, the United States, and more Great Britain, they are all federal states now. But many of those federal states are insufficiently federal in the sense that the federal units do not have taxing power. And I think taxing power is a really essential part of federalism. So if you have a federal state as Germany, where the lender, the states, the lender, do not really have their own taxing capacity, you can forget it. because then what happens is that, of course, the lower units muster a lot of lobbying activity to get money from the central government. And the same seems to happen in Argentina. So what we really need is a taxing capacity of the lower units, so they can burden the citizens, but at the same time they can provide services. And so the citizens compare the benefits and the costs that arise. I argue here that the European Union is a very unfortunate example of a federal system or of a decentralized system, because too much money is accumulated in the center in Brussels. And when you look at decentralization in terms of the European regions, I will come back to that later, you immediately see European regions have not been created from below, are not active, are not democratic, but are essentially regions and units which lobby for more money from Brussels. And the principle of subsidiarity, which has been enshrined in the Maastricht Treaty, I think is very ineffective, because essentially what happens is that the Brussels bureaucracy and the Brussels politicians decide whether a lower unit is able to provide a service. And of course they always say the lower units are not really able to do it. That's of course wrongly a wrong construction. Subsidiarity should be defined from below and not from above. So the second proposition is that federalism is good, but should be further developed. My third proposition is that there is an alternative to the problems with centralized states, but also with federalism. One of the problems of federalism is, of course, the spillover effects that arise when a unit is acting and has repercussions, negative or positive externalities affecting other regions. So the suggestion, the proposal we have, namely to have this foci, is exactly to overcome those disadvantages of federalism. The we stands for the fact that I have done this work together with my co-worker Rainer Eichenberger. So what are foci? Foci are functional units. That means for each function of government, let's say for water provision, or for the cleaning of used water, or for education, or for traffic, or for crime prevention, whatever you like, there should be an appropriate jurisdiction or unit which extends exactly to the particular function, which takes care of the function. So one looks at a function, let's say education or water treatment, and then one defines the appropriate extension of the unit. I have here a very simple picture which tries to capture that. Let's consider consider first environment and assume that the problems that arise for environment are to have this extension. And then let's assume further that primary education has this optimal extension, and then there is another focus, that's the singular of foci, which has this extension, And then there is a secondary education, let's say the college, which has even a larger extension. And now you immediately see the point. The functional units are defined according to the problems here, education or the environment, and therefore have different extensions. And so the O of FOCI derives from the fact that because the functions are defined according to the problems, there are overlaps. They are not, as we are used to, defined independently, but they really overlap. And you see here the many overlaps. And there are two types of overlaps. Overlaps between different functions, and in the red case you see there are even overlaps of competing providers of primary education. There is this overlap between those two suppliers, which of course, you see it immediately in the back, this establishes competition. And that is the C, competition. There are two uses here of the word competition. The first is, if people in one particular focus are not satisfied with the relationship between benefits and costs, or benefits and taxes they have to pay, they can exit and move to another focus. And in this particular case here, somebody who is not satisfied with primary education and lives in this area can easily switch to the secondary education, to another educational focus, and with low costs. And the second part of competition of this FOCI means that this FOCI should be democratically organized with elections, and if you want, and I would suggest that, with direct democratic elements, so possibly direct voting on issues. But that is not absolutely necessary. What is necessary is that there is exit, and I have seen that there was a talk here on secession. So this concept here very much stresses that secession is a good thing and not a bad thing. Secession is a good thing because it establishes competition between jurisdictions. And so the J stands for jurisdiction, which in that case means taxation, the right to tax. And that is very important. The FOCI would not be fruitful if they wouldn't have the right to impose taxation. So if you now look again at this picture here, somebody living here, in this area here, has to pay taxes to very different suppliers, to one of the two educational focus, to the environmental focus, and to the secondary education focus. So they get a tax bill, which is the addition of various taxes from the four, or actually three providers of governmental services. So it's no longer that one gets one tax from the central government. Perhaps you think that this is completely crazy to have such a menu of taxes, but I don't think that it is completely crazy. I have a weekend house near Zurich in the canton of Thurgau, and there I exactly get a menu of taxes, a whole menu, about 4 or 5. So I pay for an educational commune, I pay for a religious commune and that I pay for a a commune providing fresh water, etc. What I can't do in my place where I have the weekend house is to switch from one to the other when I'm dissatisfied. So in the canton of Thurgau we don't have Foci, but we have some elements of it. Now, what is the result of that? And that is my fourth proposition. Foci improve the working of democracy because we now have two mechanisms which push politicians to follow the wishes of the population. The first is secession or exit, and the second is the direct participation possibilities of the voters through elections and perhaps referenda. Secondly, there is efficiency, economic efficiency, because exit forces the suppliers to have a good relationship, an efficient relationship between the benefits provided to the voters and the cost in terms of taxes. And if they are not efficient in that, firms and people will decide to move, to take the services from another focus, from another provider. And then what I already pointed out is when problems change, and in a dynamic society problems always change, these foci can easily adjust. If some problems becomes outmoded, the particular focus disappears, and if new problems arise, new foci will be founded. And if you compare that to the setup we have now, which is that essentially the national boundaries are completely fixed, and there is no and remain fixed. When problems change, as we observe in the modern society and economy, there are lots of additional problems arising. This is not the case with foci because they will be adjusting. My fifth proposition is that foci are perhaps, they look rather revolutionary at first, but if one looks in history and if one considers various countries, they at least some elements of foci do exist. The historical example I would like to provide is the Hanse. That was this functional organization in northern Germany, in Scandinavia, in Russia, etc. These were functional. That was a functional organization that served to lower the transaction costs of trade, and it was extremely successful. It existed for hundreds of years until it was essentially brought down by national states, by nationalism. But before, cities could be a member of the Hanse, even if they belonged to the what was it? Oh, yes, exactly. So, yeah. Or to the Russian Empire, or to to the Swedish king. That didn't matter. It was a functional organization and it worked well. Now, I would like to mention for today the case of the United States, where you have a lot of special districts. Special districts are functional units. There is one great problem with most special districts. They are not really democratic. And they are essentially run by the administrators, the politicians of the various communes that make up the special district. That's in almost all cases. That's almost always the case, and that means, of course, that these special districts are more technocratic units, while the FOCI we propose should be really democratic. In Switzerland, we have a lot of special districts. We call them Zweckgemeinschaften, and there's a gentleman here who speaks German so well. Zweckgemeinschaften means associations to pursue a certain goal, a certain task. And there are a great many of them. For instance, it's very, very often happens that the small communes, we have an enormous number of small communes, often with 500 inhabitants. When they run a school, of course they don't do it on their own, but they talk to the other communes, and then a new setup is made, a Zweckgemeinschaft, which then runs a primary or a secondary school, and so the economies of scale are, of course, exploited in real politics. This is similar to a focus, but it's of course not exactly what we suggest. Now I would like to go to the other direction. So far the suggestion was more on the level of communes. I think that FOCI could really provide a good model for the European Union. I have here noted what is sometimes talked of, variable geography, multi-speed, etc. And when these terms are used, they are used in a very negative way by the European Union politicians. They say we cannot tolerate that we have a variable geography or different speeds. We all have to have the same speed. Except there are some exceptions, like the Schengen treatment about the borders, about the police controls and borders, or of course the Euro, where at least 2 countries didn't want to participate in, or more countries didn't want to participate in. But note that the new countries of the East, which want to become members of the European Union, they have to accept the whole acquis communautaire. Just everything, the whole, I think now 40,000 pages. They can no longer choose whether they want to belong to the Eurozone or stay outside. So European politicians always push for equality. They do not want to have this variability. What we suggest is exactly the opposite. I think a real fruitful future Europe should take care of the variability, the differences existing in Europe, and have a constitution which cares for that. Just imagine the French. Do you really want to have a Europe which is run according to Prussian principles? Probably not. And of course, the Germans would probably not like to have a Europe run according to French administrative principles. And the Britons don't want that, etc. So how to solve this problem? I think it's not a real problem. It is the essence of Europe. The essence of Europe is diversity, and it has proved to be extremely fruitful. And there are a lot of people like Jones. I saw that you have the book at the Institute by Jones. He argues that Europe's growth exactly comes from this variability, from the differences. And once we have equality, the growth would stop. And the example he cites, and there was also an article in Pitlos about that, The example we can cite is in China. China had a huge was far advanced in technology and economics, but especially it had a lot more innovations than Europe in the Middle Age, and that was all stopped by an emperor who wanted to have everything equal. And I think we should exactly not make this mistake. We should not have a European culture, a European economy, a European money. No, let's have very different things. But of course, I realize the euro cannot be changed anymore. The mistake was made. But I think we should make the mistake in every regard. We should really hold back and say the essence of Europe is exactly this variability, and we should see that we exploit the advantages of having larger units in terms of economies of scale, but especially with respect to exchange. So let's have open trade, let's have less protectionism in every respect, but let's keep the variability at the same time. The sixth proposition is that we think that that our idea of FOCI compares favorably to what is today. I think the federal units and regions which now exist in Europe are really dependent on the finance that comes from above through the national states, and of course which is given through the structural funds and whatever the names, and they have few responsibilities, and in particular these regions cannot raise their own taxes, and therefore they are a lobbying institution in order to get more money from the center, in that case the national states and Brussels. The principle of subsidiarity is extremely vague. You cannot undertake a policy by using the word subsidiarity, because it's not strictly defined, and therefore it's always used by those in power, which is in our case from above. And perhaps the last point, this European federalism is more a coordination according bureaucratic administrative lines than according to democratic ideas. My eighth proposition is that for a future Europe, FOCI that's my proposal, would be a good idea to have. We could have a real network of collaboration, but which is not always on the European level. No, it's on the level which is appropriate for the task. Consider the Alsace, or rather a small commune in the Alsace on the Rhine River, and on the other part of the Rhine there's a German commune. There is absolutely no reason in the world why Paris has to decide, and in the case of Germany, Stuttgart, if it's in Baden-Württemberg, has to decide on whether these two communes can have a joint school, or at least or exchange teachers in order to teach German on the one side and French on the other side, and things like that. I think that should solely be the matter of the two communes, and they could establish a focus and impose taxes for that particular enterprise or task. So that would be the small. What about the large? We exactly see that some of the problems we have on the European continent are much larger than Europe. For instance, defense. I think defense on a European level, we see that, of course, every day is a ridiculous idea. It's too small. And therefore, people turn to NATO. NATO, in this sense, is a focus. But of course, it doesn't meet the other requirements. It's not democratic, and it's of course very heavily dominated by the Americans. That's of course not in that case. In that respect, it's not a good example. But with respect to how one function can be larger than Europe, I think it's an appropriate example. I think what we have to take care of in the future Europe is that we don't have a Europe of different classes, the poor ones and the rich ones. And I think this issue of poor and rich will come when these 5 to 10, 15 and perhaps 20 countries from the East will become part of the European Union. Then the real problems arise, because the income differences are huge. And all of a sudden, Spain, for instance, and Portugal have to pay for these even poorer nations. So we have then the problem that there are the rich and the poor, and that will be very bad. I think if you have this flexible setup of Europe with Turkey, you have diversity as the main idea of Europe, but at the same time, of course, completely open boundaries. We should have the Europe of the future should be one of contestable markets, but in that case, contestable political markets. I think Europe was very good in having contestable economic markets. I think to a very large extent the four freedoms were successful within the European Union. But politically, nothing happened. I think politically speaking, the European Union is an extremely old-fashioned type of institution. And my second to last proposition is that we would like to argue that these Turkey could really be introduced on the European level. I do think that one should have a common base, which every focus and every such jurisdiction should absolutely accept, and here they are. Of course, there must be some ground rules, for instance, democracy or basic human rights. But I think there is not much controversy on these. Of course, that is controversial because politicians, of course, very strongly object to the possibility of funding Turkey, because it means that the construction of the future Europe would emerge from the citizens, from below, from the people, from the individuals, and not be imposed by the politicians who say that is the right way to do. And therefore, of course, they oppose it. We should also have communal autonomy when communes have nothing to say. For instance, in the case I talked about Alsace and Baden-Württemberg and education, if the French or the German communes have no decision power and no power to tax, Turkey cannot emerge. So we have to have the right to have communal. We have to have communal autonomy, and it must be. That would be something which would make sense to protect by the European court, and not social rights or such abstract things, but the basic units, the democratic union, and then the process would work out. The process would generate good solutions. So it's a process. What is here suggests it is a strongly procedural approach. And so the basic conclusion is the European Constitution should be extended beyond the four freedoms to the fifth one, namely to have the right to form foci even without the consent of the national states. So the suggestion of foci does not mean that we want to attack national states directly. I think there is no point. We would lose. I mean, national states are so strongly enshrined. But I think if there is a right to have an alternative to national states, namely these foci, the national states would come under competition and would have to show to their citizens whether they really deliver the goods citizens pay for their taxes for. And with a formation of foci, this competition would be established. I'm sure there is a lot of room for discussion. Thank you very much indeed.
Well, I think foci has a very interesting approach to criticize national states. Intermediaries, national states. Because you have the right to dissociate from until the stage of the very individual. So where does the legal power of foci to tax people come from? There would be no legal basis anymore. So everybody would be free to anywhere they would like to get the services. So there would be no state anymore. So I think there is theoretical and maybe practical difficulty, because foci would maybe have difficulty to maintain during sufficient time their existence.
The principle of foci still works. That's the Tibu idea, a local public good. And moreover, I think that a very large share of public services are not public goods at all. For instance, education. There is no, it's not a public good, it's something different. It's more a private good or a club good or whatever. So now you say if it's a public good, we have problems with exit. But don't forget that the extension of a focus adjusts to exactly the territory on which something is a public good. So we minimize spillovers. Yes, yes, I think you're quite right. I think the basic idea is to go back to the state as a voluntary basis, as a voluntary contract, but on the constitutional level. I mean, once you are a member of a focus, of course, you have to pay taxes, etc. Then you cannot say, I don't want to. Exactly. Yes, yes.
On private companies existing on more or less on the same basis.
One, in a way, that's true, but we think of local public goods as a very important ingredient, and that's not normally provided by private suppliers. So. A firm cannot supply a local public good because people wouldn't pay. They could consume without paying.
We have made a conference of private towns, private cities, who supply goods like Western in the United States, Irvine in California, and so on. So it's private entrepreneurs who really provide private cities.
I'm not absolutely happy about these walled cities because I think they create this difference between high income and low income citizens. And it's a unitary government, private government which is established. While I want to have different extensions according to the geography of the province.
For transportation, they can contract with a private company to go from Western to Washington DC, for example. And well, I think the argument, at least private firms or entrepreneurs, have already offered. The question you mentioned is about they have their own school, but the school is the primary school could be a private firm. So there is no unlike the local public good, streets, the environment, the views, the air, what they could have the theater, for example, could be owned by the cities, and it's not taxation. It's you pay a charge, you pay a fee to the cities. So that, well, it means in your own view, you cannot forbid such emergence of private cities.
But the examples you said were private goods, all local public goods. Yeah, right.
In the history, the old towns in Germany or even in Gand, there's a lot of public goods provided inside the cities also. And what you mentioned, which is a big difference with the private cities we have discussed last week, is that the right to vote is not the same. That's true, it's a big difference. Because those who have the right to vote in the private cities are the owners, not the other people. So the distinction, I don't think about rich people and not rich people, because if you look at Western cities with 50,000 people, you have a large group, young people, old people, richer and more welfare or less welfare. And you have a gated community for poor people also, for many security reasons. But the right to vote is not the same. That's really true. Big difference, I think, in the efficiency of the local public good. But, well, that's interesting because you offer with your system a possibility for a private firm to organize and to produce local public goods. And competition will say, look, who will go there, who will go in another place.
Excuse me, I arrived late, and so I missed principles 1 through 4. Tell me if my question was already answered. I've worked with organizations all my life as a consultant, and I wonder about the organizational problem in an evolving world, and the problem of defining perimeters for your thinking, where perimeters that emerge at one point get fuzzy, overlap over time. And one of the advantages of the unitary company, unitary state, is that you have a decider who says, we will reorganize in this way. The other speaker mentioned anarchy. My fear would be that it would lead to an organizational anarchy over time, that might lead to stalemates between the competing forces, that they won't merge, they won't agree on how to redefine their perimeters, and that it could be democratic gridlock. End of question.
Interaction between various sections of the administration. And we know that these interactions are not very efficient either. So what a focus or what the focus system indeed produces, these problems come into the open, are more openly visible. So in a way, I think in a modern society we have this variety already, but it is partly suppressed by the centralized administration, and only appears in administrative fightings and problems, while here it is in the focus system is much more open, and then it looks more clumsy than an ideal centralized state. But you said one person decides. Normally in a democracy it's not the case. And there are a lot of negotiations before the decision is taken. A little bit an extreme view of how politics work. I mean, yeah, it's the ideal theory, but in actual fact, things work quite differently. Yeah. And I think, with respect, to identity, one could argue, today we have one identity, we are French. But in actual fact, that is not true. We don't have one identity. We are French, we are Europeans, and we are Parisians, or Bordelais, or whatever the name, and we are Catholics, and we believe in one football club, etc. We have multiple identities today. We are no longer one thing, and one cannot even say either you are a Catholic or a Frenchman, either you are a Jew or a Frenchman. I think that's completely wrong. You can be both. You can be both, or more. And I think, again, the focus system sort of brings this into the open, things we already experience today, but which are suppressed by the old institutions we have.
created by such a system where people just don't care about getting informed and voting on so many issues, and whether that's a problem of human nature.
I don't think that it is a real problem. I think, in my view, if the government does what people like, the government should do, there is no need to vote. So I wouldn't judge a political system by its abstention rate or participation rate. I don't think that a good government has a high participation rate. I think a good government has a rather low one. What matters really is the change in the participation. So when people are dissatisfied, it must jump up. And when they are, however, satisfied with what the government is doing, like in principle in a purely competitive political system with a median vote and with a median voter model and two competing parties, they propose and undertake the same policy, then the rate of participation should actually be nil or very, very low. Only when there is a deviation from the preferences of the voters, people should get active and punish the politicians for that. So I disagree with the view of most political sociologists and political scientists that participation as such is important. I think the right to participate, that's the essential thing.
For condominiums, for condo syndicat copropriétaires. Condominium homeowners. I mean, what is organized by condominium homeowners is something very close to Foki in a way. So in fact, it does exist, but it doesn't have the power to act as a Foki. But to know, and I doubt that in France we could add something which will really look like a Foki because the government will not accept it. It's something which is close to what there is in the United States and in Switzerland because votation is a tradition. I think that people who vote are quite a lot, and there is not, most people go to the school to express their opinion because they are paying, and they've got a real alternative. And it's something which is not
very crucial question indeed. I completely agree with you. The government, of course, hates these ideas. It's completely clear. If I was in the government, I would also suppress this idea. Because it really means that power goes to the citizens. They decide what is happening and not the government. And of course, so they fight against it. I think where we can introduce is on local issues, as the one with Alsace and the German side of the line, on the low level, because there the politicians won't oppose it so much, because it's just not so very important for them. And secondly, I think with the integration of the eastern countries, I think so far the European Union doesn't really know how to integrate these 10, 12, 15 eastern nations into Europe. And you saw that the last meeting there was practically no change in institutions of the European Union. And as I said, the need to accept the whole acquis communautaire 100% and being able to enter, or if they don't accept 100%, they cannot enter the European Union. I think that's an absolutely crazy idea. Why shouldn't, let's say, Romania enter the European Union in some respects with respect to some functions, but not to others? Where they are ready, they should be able to participate in the European Union with free market, and in other respects not. And like this, it's this 0-1 decision, and that's always wrong. That's always awkward. So I think one possibility to introduce FOCI is indeed when the real problems crop up of the integration of the Eastern nations, because then the European Union will see the huge problems created. And then perhaps they will be ready to have a more flexible integration of these countries, more flexible and in a certain temporal sequence.
I would like to come back to the idea of overlapping jurisdiction. In fact, if there is some specific investment in the locality, as you mentioned, in your environment, you have 3 or 4 overlapping jurisdictions. But if the mobility is costly, mainly because you have specific investment in the locality, you will increase the tax menu, as you mentioned, in your own secondary home in Switzerland. So that means, nevertheless, there is, well, we need to have low cost, or if really I introduce these type of things, I will lose maybe some specific investment because I will not take such investment knowing that it will be costly to exit, thinking about homeowners or to be rent. In some sense, maybe I will divert resources in renting and not in owning the land.
To try to grapple with it by having entry prices and exit prices. So, for instance, when you have an university education, I think the government who provided it, or the focus who provided it, should be able to impose a price when you exit. I mean, it makes sense to an economist, but most politicians, yeah.
The same territory. What happens in case of a conflict? I mean, normally it's in this system there is a risk that you have to go to the government court to settle the case. So in that case, the government would have control over the 4 cases because it could decide which one is right and which one has to pay. So we would need to go to private court. The government.
On the basis of these very basic rights I was mentioning, human rights and democratic procedures, etc. But then I think you give the answer or the suggestion yourself. We know from international trade that private law, no, private, it's not private law. Yeah. Yes, the private arbitration, yeah. The private works extremely well and is much more efficient than these international courts. And a lot of people who do international trade before having problems, of course, before they engage, they fix that a private court is going to decide. because the public courts are so inefficient. But the precondition is, of course, that there is no war between those units, and so we have to have some basic rules. Without basic rules, we would have an anarchy with possibly negative consequences.
Private firms who try to capture the croquets and cartelize through this way.
If they cartelize, this means the relationship between their services and the costs are not good. And then we have this open markets principle. Then people would exit and establish new firms. There would be entrepreneurs who would be able to do
an alliance, the defense, NATO organizations. But there is a lot of organization like for aeronautic, civil transportation and so on, who looks like more cartelization of private firms. And you think it looks like a focus because your point about international, well, in the international scene, there's a lot of organization who looks like maybe a focus.
In the back, there are nations pushing them and prohibiting rising. I was thinking about that. I think that's a very nice point with the football. This International Football Association, the FIFA, I think is an extremely monopolistic, inefficient organization. And the question is, why isn't there another one? Okay, there is UEFA, which is quite competitive, at least in Europe. At least we have two.
The FIFA has discussed about Paris as the next world game. And they said, look, we disagree with the way you control the pass, I would say in English, doping, drug, because our laws are far more restrictive than the FIFA laws. And they said, look, we will go in Paris if we apply our own law. So it looks like a good competition in some sense against the French state, because we said, look, now we will go to Moscow, because in Moscow you can any rules, I suppose it is okay. So that's a good example, but you mentioned there is, I don't know that there is there is other federations at the world level about football. Yeah. Yeah. It's different from the world one.
Of FIFA, but it is behaving very independently, because exactly. Yes, there are 4 or 3. Yeah. But of course, again, the government involvement in soccer in football is extremely strong, because the government is heavily subsidizing football, because they pay.
On the stock market.
Paid by the government.
Just a short question. Who will establish the basic rules? I mean, government, national government, and would there be competing firms in justice, police, army, in case of Turkey?
The basic rights can be established without government. There is a general consensus that there should be basic human rights and basic rights to contract and things like that.
In fact, exists, but there is no state, European state yet. So that's there is an overlapping injustice in Europe, in fact, because it's higher than the national government, but there is no monopoly of the European governance on justice yet. I think so there is some example in Europe of already done this competing jurisdiction.
On the internet, it's ICANN, which assigns the what is the name? The domain names now. The domain names, and it's not run by a government, though the American government was at the beginning was behind it, but now it is completely it's independent of the government. It's really it emerged as a functional unit, so that's the specific purpose.
I would like to speak about the law. I have been told that in the world there were two different ways of treating the law problems. One is based upon the common law, the English one, and the other one upon the French law system. Of course, things have changed, and when you see the different countries all over the world, it's true that there are two different ways of having a relationship. How will it be in the future Europe? How is it possible to combine the two? Because when I've been studying in the United States the system based upon the English one, it's so different from the one that you see in Latin countries. It's difficult to imagine how it is possible to find a third road. How to combine the two systems, which have good things, of course. This one is more flexible, more easier to be flexible with the world that changes, and the one that is based upon the French one, which is so fixed. So I'm just wondering.
Each focus can decide on which principle it works. And we see in international trade, after all, the European nations built on the Roman law can do trade with the Americans, so though they have a completely different legal system. But they have arranged themselves. So what I would predict is that there will be folky with Roman law and folky with common law, and they can interact. So we would again have a huge variability, much more variability. We would have in the continent, on the continent, we would have common law part, and probably the Americans or whoever would introduce some Roman law elements.